Our next speaker is Bernie Malinoff, and he is the president of Element54, a Toronto and Montreal-based strategic consultancy and full-service market research firm. Element54 initiated groundbreaking research into online survey design, which has shaped industry dialogue and consciousness around emerging technologies in survey research. Bernie has spoken at a cross-section of high-profile events, including the MRIA, the Market Research Event, Advertising Research Foundation, Castro, the MRA, and SMR. In 2010, Bernie was nominated by the Next Generation Marketing Research and GMR Disruptive Innovation Award. He is a past president of the MRA Quebec chapter and sessional lecturer at McGill University on marketing and research issues. So welcome, Bernie.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. And first of all, a big thank you to Lenny Murphy. Clearly, this is on, eh? This is on. First of all, a big thank you to Lenny, who I think had promised me that so many speakers were coming today with their A games, and I think all of those before me have certainly lived up to that. So thank you for bringing such a great group out today. I want to talk to you a bit about my experiences, and perhaps like many, I, several years ago, was at a career crossroads where somewhere between the balance of the traditions of our craft and some emerging technologies, I had the opportunity to reflect on almost 20 years, some of which spent at a billion-dollar meat and potato shop, and some of which spent at an emerging technology shop, both of which blended this great set of experiences. And like many, I got to drink the Kool-Aid a few years back of how the great promise of how an online survey could be made better. It could be made better by using engagement strategies. So online surveys, we could make them better. They didn't need to be the telephone script that we slapped onto a computer screen and called it an online survey. There was a better way to do it. We just weren't sure how. This insatiable curiosity to find out, was there in fact a linear link between the survey instrument itself, making it prettier, leading to better data, and ultimately making better decisions, was something we've tried to explore over the past few years. We've led several research-on-research studies since 2009, Sexy Questions, Dangerous Results, a large quant study, Eyes Don't Lie. We did 100 eye-tracking interviews where people looked at surveys, and we used eye-tracking technology to help understand the survey engagement process. And then, as Betty kindly referenced, the most recent study with John Polston from GMI last fall for the ESMR study. No matter which of the studies we had done, effectively they all have concluded the same basic idea, that if you change the words, if you change the images, you're going to change the results. I'm not here to debate which one is right, which one is wrong, but we have simply learned the unalienable truth that if you change something, you will see a change in the results. We played around with sliders and radio buttons and drag and drops and anything else that was available to us. In the end, where you position the slider mattered. And if you put a slider on instead of a regular radio button, it changed the results. So behavioral questions changed, attitudinal questions changed. Even benign questions, like how often do you brush your teeth, you would see a variance that was just too wide to have any comfort in. As we did a lot of secondary work and trying to understand, some of the holy grail normative questions, like an NPS. It was one of the most popular forum items on the NPS forum for several months because I had naively asked how people lay out their NPS question and was amazed at how many different variations of the NPS question exists. You don't need to use their anchoring. You don't even need to use their scale. You can color code it. You can change the words. Now, you could argue that as long as you keep doing it the same way, it has a certain amount of validity to it. But even a normative question like an NPS score was not being used in a, quote, normative way. John Polston, who we've referenced a couple of times now, has also helped me appreciate the value of linguistic gamification. It's not all about the sexiness of the survey experience. Sometimes it's just using the tools of our craft, asking a better question. That's what we're empowered to do, to translate a marketer's need into a good-worded question, well-worded question. So the example here is, what are your favorite Olympic events? You see it in blue, the fairly low word counts. What if you changed it around? Imagine you were in charge of the TV coverage for the London 2012 Olympics. They only broadcast the events that you wanted to watch. And all of a sudden you see 2 to 3 times the level of word counts. So what is the objective? Is the objective to stay with what's comfortable, what we've known, and what we've always used? Or is there an opportunity at times to use either linguistic or visual types of survey enhancements? I've often been quoted as saying, I think what we need to focus on is a purpose-based use of innovation. I think what's incumbent upon us is to have a reason for changing something. So maybe a survey question that's at hand is plagued by straight lining. We know in a hospital that's never a good thing to hear, that someone's straight lined. A survey experience is exactly the same thing. Your patient died. So perhaps in a basic example, instead of seeing somebody choose the same answer vertically all the way down, you'd employ a flash question, or perhaps a gamified approach where you gave them an instant answer, whether they were correct or incorrect, and ultimately tallied up how many they got right or how many got wrong. I mean, in the end, we took the objective of saying, here is my question. I'm not changing the wording, but I'm going to ask it a few different ways, and my objective is to see, can I eradicate straight lining for this type of question? And in fact, we were able to reduce it from 9 to 6 to 0%. So if you take that approach, that perhaps my issue is I have a high degree of flatlining on a certain type of question and I want to fix it, what are now the benefits and risks? So really a purpose-based use to that. But I think one of the things that we can't ignore is the amount of data chaos that comes from different ways of asking a question. Here's just one, which is an average number of brand mentions, depending on how we've asked the question, in this case 5 different ways, and a 40% variance from the average number of mentions low to high. It's beyond any tolerable limits of what we would even be able to accept. It's not plus or minus 5 points, where a little bit of change is something we could live with if we felt it had an offsetting benefit. In some cases, the changes are just massive. So as Tom Anderson was telling me yesterday, we were reflecting on all of our tracking experiences, you don't muck with trackers. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about it today. Because trackers are different beasts. Any type of longitudinal study, repetitive type of study, they carry risks. What happens if this study itself is something that goes into a performance metric, a bonusing metric? Who's the one that goes and tells the VP, the good news is that consumers now love our survey. The bad news is nobody's getting a bonus because our scores dropped 10 points. The reality is we changed the survey, we're going to change the results. Certain types of studies don't lend themselves very well to change. And perhaps that's why if we think about what types of studies, maybe it works really well for a young audience, 7 to 10-year-olds. It's not longitudinal, it's point in time, engagement is the objective. But if you're running an adult tracker and you've been running it for 5 years, the reason why you don't see a lot of change in trackers is because we know all you need to do is blow on it and the results will change. I reached out to clients, some of which are in the room today, and thank you for participating, none of which we work with, all of which are engaged in managing trackers of some kind. We spoke to about a dozen clients in Canada, US, and Europe ahead of the conference, and we asked them 4 very specific questions. Are they happy with their tracker? What changes have they made in the past 12 months? What changes would you make in the next 12 months? And if they've considered or tested any types of visual or linguistic types of enhancements. The common theme that came out of those discussions is that trackers are like freight trains. You know when they're going to leave the station, you know when they're going to come in, you've got a predictable amount of load, when it's going to go on, what it's going to come off, and there's comfort in that. It's not the sexiest train on the track, but it delivers the goods. It's usually on time, you don't hear a lot about derailments, not necessarily the most engaging research in the whole department, but it's something that does get the data delivered. Some of the quotes that came out, trackers can make organizations lazy. One of the fears was that as emerging technologies were starting to excite marketers and the research departments, that trackers would be perceived to have less value over time as new and emerging methodologies were somehow making those methodologies look fairly archaic. But perhaps one of the largest client pain points is about the value. Trackers, by their very nature, and I'm lumping tracker all together. I mean, clearly, as people talked about brand or CSAT or ad, you got a variance of perspective. But the larger concern is the so what. Why does what you're coming in to tell me matter? And what did you tell me that can influence what I can expect to see from you when you come back in 3 months from now on the next roadshow? And that seems to be the larger issue around value. When we ask people what changes they made in the last 12 months, nothing about gamification or any types of survey enhancement. Somebody was delighted that they finally won the battle to reduce the number of image attributes from nearly 50 to just 24. Adding a couple of brands. What are you going to do in the next 12 months? Well, maybe I'll make a few little changes here and there, maybe make them shorter, more frequent, more functional, less functional, a little more emotion, but basic table stake stuff. No one had any big plans for their trackers. So then the question was, well, what would I do from a gamification point of view? Would I do anything to the visual or linguistic aspects of my longitudinal studies? The answer was a resounding no, 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 and even a God no. That fundamentally what people were struggling with was the notion that while participation or engagement could be better, the larger issues seem to be plaguing the trackers more than the small ones. They are bigger and fundamentally more problematic. So I've got one slide left, and it really is about, now what do I do about that? So thanks, Bernie, for making me miserable about my trackers. But is there something that we can do? And clients were wonderfully prescriptive and constructive about what they felt were the fixes that can help an ailing tracker. So here they are, and there are 5 ways. Right about now, there should be a tweet where I've posted the link to download the slides. This is the one slide that really matters. I think there is, first and foremost, an interesting dilemma. And we heard about that this morning. You know, who's the talent servicing the tracker? Is it junior? Is it senior? And often there's a skill set gap between maybe what the tracker really needs and clients feeling like. If you want it to be like a train and you have a trained conductor, then staff it accordingly. If you want it to be something more valuable, bring in the senior level researchers that can really help add some fire to it. Be more involved, and be more involved more often. The rinse, lather, repeat for the second one plagues us so many times. We can't continue to ask a question just because we've always asked it that way. Think about what you can and what you can't change, and if the question is valuable, you keep it. If it's not adding value, it's not being used in decision making, there must be a better way to ask it or drop it. The pain point on client engagement is not about the visual aspect of it. I think what we really need to recognize, it's about the depth and speed of learning. It's not about putting lipstick on a pig and all of a sudden this is a pretty study. And I think the last 2 really do touch on what we continue to see as emerging ideas. The first is not to leave data on the table. Too many times questions are reported as silos. People become victim to that because the guy that set up the report before me is the one who I've now inherited it from, and he would have sections on awareness and usage and all these various silos. When was the last time somebody connected the dots? Don't leave data on the table. And the last is perhaps where there are the opportunities to do so. Merging tracking data with behavioral or database knowledge is the sweet spot. That ultimately actions really don't lie, and being able to correlate that with some of those existing trackers is really where the magic does come from. Right now, I think I'm standing between you and a break after a long afternoon, so I wanted to thank you for your time. We probably have a couple of minutes for questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, I just can't stop talking. Bernie, with so many nuances in survey design, I think that for anybody who's especially just coming into research, it might just be so overwhelming. You know, like they might change the colour of a font, it can change the data. They might add an image, it can change the data, as we've seen here with all your experimental research, and it's wonderful. What would you advise a new researcher coming into the industry who's trying to take on survey design for the first time?
And if they want to rock the boat, the wrong one to rock is the big container ship like a tracker. Rock the smaller tugboats that if it makes a wave, it's not going to be as disruptive as tipping over the cargo ship. I think what we all recognize is, and thanks to you, Betty, that there's an emerging group of researchers who have this unbridled passion to do things better. And nobody wants to stand in the way of that. I think what we're all struggling with is the when and why use of an innovative technology can help us more than hurt us. And the types of studies that I've looked at are the ones where more pain can be caused by change than good. So young researchers would love to see experimenting with ad hoc studies, things that can start being repeated for all the good.
I guess I want to challenge that your statement just there, because that seems to me, at least from my experience, exactly the wrong place to start with this. Because when you start with little and marginal things, no one actually notices a difference. My hope is, I think Kantar World Panel is presenting an example here. They were planning on how they've actually used mobile research and really restructuring a tracker to really change their business for the better by getting a lot more and better data. So I guess my question for you might be, from my experience, what I've seen is companies, when they actually are coming to an inflection point with the tracker, they know they actually have to change. And so when when have you seen people needing to change? Because that's really the time when they should be using, trying to make a bold move rather than just trying to tweak it or keep it going in just using a new way to collect the same data the same way.
Yeah, I mean, the sense I had from client discussions was that there are life stages. It's either running smoothly and it's on the tracks, it's either heading for derailment, or it's already derailed. Some of the clients that I spoke with were going to be starting processes to find new vendors, largely because they had derailed already. And I think to your point, the real question is there a moment where you can avoid derailment? And if so, what's the right way to do it? If a client is happy with a study, then that's ultimately the litmus test. If people don't show up to your presentations, it's a good idea that the tracker is not delivering the value that it could or should be. So I think the litmus test of who's happy with it, who's not, is a pretty good one to follow. And ultimately, is the data being used, and is it useful? But it's a pretty big brush that we're casting today. I think the basic takeaway I want people to have is that longitudinal studies carry different risks than ad hoc or non-repetitive ones. That's the message, and that we use more caution as a buyer beware for those types of studies than others.
I just wanted to make a comment. I'm Colleen and Warner from Phoenix, Arizona. I work at a electric utility, and the saying around our industry is that utilities move at the speed of glaciers, and I can vouch for that comment being true. We changed our tracker from phone to online, and we ran them parallel for about 2.5 years, and upper management was so wedded to this thing, it was just really hard to, we kept showing the results that, they're virtually the same. It took a long time for them to let go of what they had been used to seeing. Even that methodology change was not that big a deal, but it took a long time, and we had to keep going back to them over and over again and saying the results are the same, and we finally are now at 100% online. So it took a long time.
No, I think your experiences probably mirror anyone who's ever migrated a tracker from phone online. It's never easy, it's never fun, and I think the big elephant in the room are norms. These from our presentation, which I encourage people to go dig up or email me and I'll send it to you, all talked about the challenge of scalability and norms. When you change things, you risk changing norms. And for people who have norms as their castle, you don't lower the drawbridge. That's not the way to protect your business. So, even norms have a self-serving objective for people running trackers. So this is a very complicated issue.